everybody, we're going to start. People as they come in can just join us, but I want to keep us to our lunch and learn time. So about an hour for everyone to eat and enjoy this while they take a little break in the day. I just want to welcome everyone and say thank you for joining us. My name is Annie Newton, and I am the Program and Development Director at the Alliance for Historic Hillsborough. And this is our last Lunch and Learn and our Lunch and Learn series that we've done in conjunction with the Burwell School, that's highlighting their work on people of color from the Burwell School. So I'd like to welcome Felton Foushee. He's here today joining us to talk about his pilgrimage to Montgomery and racial equity. Just so everyone knows, I'm sure this is not their first time on Zoom, but in case it is, just a quick reminder, if you have any questions, there's a Q&A box at the bottom here. If you click it, you can type anything in there. I will be monitoring it during the session. So if there's something important, like you can't hear or, something technical, just put it in there and I will respond to you. You can put any questions you've got during the talk in there, and we will get to all of the questions at the end of the talk, probably around 12:45 or so. But don't hesitate, please. Highly encourage people to interact. Again, use that Q&A box down there, and it can be used kind of for anything, even if it's just you're having a hard time seeing or something like that. So Felton Foushee, welcome. He was born and raised in Greensboro, North Carolina. A proud graduate of James B. Dudley High, Felton entered the world of higher learning non-traditionally, beginning his academic journey at 29. He holds a BA in Media Studies from UNC Greensboro and an MA in History from North Carolina Central University. Presently, he is a doctoral candidate in History at UNCG. He is the Racial Equity Engagement Officer for the Racial Equity Learning Community in Rockingham County. He consults and facilitates community conversations with the nonprofit organization NC100, and he sits on the board of the Carolina Theater in Greensboro, and he serves on the Hillsborough Historic Commission. Felton believes that our collective history is an important part of how we as a nation should address our present condition, believing that Black Americans have to be understood as a unique group. Our American experience cannot be stepped into and absorbed, nor should it be made into a hollowed out symbolic thing. The Black American experience has brought this country closer to what it claimed to be at its inception, and yet Black Americans have not been repaired in the process. So with that wonderful quote, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Felton.
Thank you so much, Ann. Greatly appreciate the time and being here, and I'm a big fan of these type of gatherings. I hold them in my work with the racial equity learning community, and as mentioned, NC100. So I think this is how we do better and get better, opening up in spaces like this and just, allowing ourselves to be edified and to be better for it as neighbors. So I'm going to begin today's presentation by playing a video. The video will give you a glimpse into the reasoning behind the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which is one of the places I visited with the students in Alabama. We went to Montgomery, Selma, and this is in Montgomery, of course, and the Legacy Museum, which is also adjacent to the National Memorial. But when I was asked to do this lunch and learn, one of the things was to connect it with Orange County or Hillsborough. So the way that it's connected is not a pleasant one, but I think we're all adults and we can get through this and we can be better for it. Lynching is the connective tissue that we'll first be discussing before I enter into conversation about the youth that I made this journey with and some of our interactions. So I'll begin with the video that should set the tone for what we'll be discussing. So bear with me as I share my screen, please. You heard my cry. All right. So yeah, not the most pleasant subject matter to highlight for a connection to Hillsborough with my trip with some students to Alabama, to Montgomery and Selma, as I've said. But nonetheless, we will have a conversation, or I'll do a presentation that I think gives us an opportunity to not just acknowledge something from our past and be, appalled or discouraged or disappointed by it, but we should actually find a point of elevation, and we should take some pride in the fact that Hillsborough, Orange County is amongst some places that are highlighting and elevating this history from a positionality of reconciliation, from a position of remembering with the intent that nothing like this should ever become common occurrence again. So with that being said, I wanted to first highlight something that probably was very noticeable, even if it didn't click immediately in the video, and that is a severe lack of protection for Black people all throughout those images, which begin with photographs of enslaved people. It should have been noticed that there was just a through line of a lack of protection, a lack of security and safety. So that lingers, right? That still lingers to this day. But at its height, post-Civil War, the failure of Reconstruction, the Reconstruction era only lasts, some people argue, 10 to 12 years after the Civil War is over. So during that period and after, primarily after Reconstruction fails, you run into some of the most unsafe times to be Black in this country, and to have descend from the institution of slavery. So we'll be talking about a few lynchings that took place in Orange County and a couple in Hillsborough specifically. And this is all information that's readily available. And again, it's because Orange County and areas such as Hillsborough and have decided to actually highlight these things and to acknowledge the past and to do things that are indicative of remembering and reconciling. And I think that's highly important. So I want to keep us to keep an upbeat spirit as we go through this stuff, to know that the recognition is for the betterment of us all now in the present. So the lack of protection, it was rampant. The exploitation of labor that took place during slavery becomes exploitative with something that became sharecropping. There was a continued exploitation of labor, and also of expertise in certain matters and fields, abilities that were gained, that were had and already utilized by people who had been enslaved and were formerly enslaved. And that was something that was hard to let go of. So in that refusal, that exploitation became, hey, you know, you could work all year long during the cropping season, and you do everything that you're supposed to do that's supposed to get you, a formerly enslaved person, and your family some type of gains. And you generally may be on the same land that you had been once enslaved upon. But now your labor is vulnerable in the sense that you don't get proper due, proper payment, and you may just be told, hey, you didn't get enough done. You're stuck here for another year of labor, and you're not going to get paid for it. That was a lot of what Black people were up against during that period of time, and that a lot of it took place in areas like Hillsborough. And two young men, Nelson and Washington Morrow, two brothers, in August of 1869, were accused of barn burning. Barn burning was something that an accusation that could be made against normally Black laborers who were, again, being exploited, being maltreated. And something I want to make sure I make understood here now is that, you know, Black people have been resisting the institution of slavery and resisting maltreatment since the beginning. And if you equate barn burning to that resistance, that's fine. If you acknowledge that the accusation or even the reality of participating in such a crime is an indicator of resistance, that's fine. But the punishment that was meted out is what we're talking about here. And I don't think that part is fine. So Nelson and Washington Morrow were accused of barn burning, some predominant farmers in Hillsborough, and they were jailed. But the jail was raided by some Klansmen. This is the birth of the original Ku Klux Klan. This is post-Civil War. This is when the Klan becomes a thing, before it dies out and then resurges in the early 20th century. But this is the early Klan. This is white men who disguised themselves or covered their faces in hoods and robes and wore robes and terrorized Black families. So during this time, they captured Nelson and Washington Morrow from the jail, took them out, judged, if you want to say so, and the leader of that mob decided that he wasn't confirmed. It wasn't confirmed to him that these young men, who were 20 and 19 at the time, had actually committed the crime. So he decided to let them go. But as they ran off into the night, they were followed by a hail of gunfire, and one of the brothers, Washington, was hit in the leg. And if the injury did not kill him, the night they spent out in the elements certainly contributed as well to his demise. So his brother Nelson was put back in jail. And this sets the stage for something that is terrorizing and horrific for a family to endure within a few months time span. But you now have the first victim of Klan violence in Hillsborough. Washington Morrow passes away, and his family is left without a brother and son. And less than a month later, another lynching takes place. A gentleman by the name of Wright Malone is abducted, and he's hung by the Klan. And it's unclear from what I could find what some of the reasoning was behind that action, but less than a month later. So keep in mind, as I'm going through these things, the amount of terror, fear, and the inability to trust people that are around you for black people in the area, not just the ones affected most intimately, but those in the area who were witnessing some of these acts. So we continue on, and again, this is a month, just over a month after Wright Malone is murdered. We have Thomas Jefferson and Morrow and Nelson Morrow. They're abducted. And I'm sorry, Thomas Jefferson and Daniel Morrow. They're abducted. They're taken from their families. Their wives and children witness this. And these are people who are related to, one of them is the father of Nelson and Washington Morrow. So again, you're getting not just a disruption of this family that is in regard to their son or sons being lynched and one being killed, but you're getting now the father of these two young men and his brother-in-law are being taken from their wife and children by force. And Thomas Jefferson's wife, Lucinda, her and her sister-in-law go out the next day to try to find their husbands. And they do. And they're with their daughter, their oldest daughters. And they find their husbands hanging 25 feet apart, or 25 yards apart in the trees not far from their home. Again, keeping in mind, the sheer horror and terror of all of this. But also keep in mind that notion of resistance, that notion of a desire for fair treatment and justice, it existed in perpetuity. It's always existed. And Lucinda did something that, people don't often highlight or think about, but she actually testified and identified the men who had taken her husband. Although they were covering their faces and disguise, so to speak, she recognized their voices and their clothing. And she even said she had always been raised with them. She had been always raised with them. So these are people that were known to the victims a lot of times. It's a very layered situation to have existed at a point in time where your neighbor could easily become your worst nightmare, and someone that you had spent time with, had grown up with, could do such acts. And the provocation hardly ever met the punishment. So that's the Morrow story as far as the family goes, and they were in Hillsborough. I'll note another lynching that I came upon, and I'll put this link in the chat if it's okay, because it's just a really good breakdown of these these events that took place. So in December of the same year, 1869, a gentleman named Cyrus Guy was lynched in Orange County, and I think that was in Eflin, which is right up the street from Hillsborough. And something I wanted to make note of because of last month's Lunch and Learn, which I had the good fortune to watch, and I was appreciative of. I'm very appreciative as a historian of the WPA files, and one thing that was noted was that of Mr. Ben Johnson, who eventually became a contributor to the WPA files, he was a native of Hillsborough. He had been enslaved in Hillsborough. He recalled the lynching of Cyrus Guy, who we call Cy Guy. He said he would never forget that lynching, and he spoke about the fact that they had he said looked like 100 Klansmen had taken Cyrus Guy, and they drew blood from his arm and wrote on him, "He shall hang between the heavens and the earth till he is dead, and that anyone who dared to take down the body shall be hanged too." His violation, so to speak, was disrespecting or insulting a white woman. That is something that was very rampant when we talk about lynching, and predominant people that were lynched were Black males, and a lot of cases were centered on some insult or some assault on white women, and that's just a through line to the 50s. And we think about Emmett Till. That's understood as the reasoning behind it. And there's so many cases associated with the violation of the rights of the civil rights of Black men being associated with some action towards white women. The Tulsa Massacre, the Wilmington Massacre has ties to that. There's just this. There became this fascination in society from the predominant society, the white society, that the sanctity of white women was just being assailed by Black men, and the justification for the brutality and lynching of Black men was a lot of times based on that false notion. So I share that one because that is generally going to show itself whenever you're having a discussion about America's past, and especially in terms of lynching of Black men. So Mr. Ben Johnson also noted, as I was discussing yesterday in my meeting in Hillsborough, that there were other lynchings that took place, and some of them are not recorded. He recalled a couple of other murders and crimes against Black Americans in the area that did not receive the notoriety or were not documented. So as many of those rusted coffin-looking memorials that you saw in that video, that I got to interact with the group of students I went to Montgomery with, how many are missing, right? There are some there that say unknown. And there's room to add more because this work is ongoing. Because as Mr. Johnson noted in the WPA files, there's people that may not ever be recognized in the way that they should for the violence that was visited upon them during a most atrocious time. So that is the unfortunate connection that I was compelled to make for this Lunch and Learn to hold weight with Orange County and Hillsborough in particular. But we can learn from it. We can do better from it. So I hope that wasn't too overwhelming for the moment. But I will give you some instantaneous moments of growth that I witnessed having taken that pilgrimage to to Montgomery and Selma and places in between. And those youth that went through the memorial and the Legacy Museum, they were present. They were not detached or making light of the moment. They took it in, and I was appreciative and I was impressed. And part of what I learned from spending that time with them was there's a need, and the need does not have an age limitation or a race limitation or any limitation. There's a need for us to really wrestle with our past so that we can do better in the future, and we can do better in the present. So after we went to the museum and we went to the memorial, I believe it was the following day, we took a trip to Selma, and we walked over the bridge, the Pettis Bridge, that is very famous and now has become a annual exercise for politicians and some activists to ceremonially cross the bridge. So we did that, and we had some wonderful conversations, and we got on the bus and we went through the town some, and we went by a church that Martin Luther King Jr. had spoke at. We did some really good things to enlighten the teens that were on this trip about the not too distant past. But then we got to a point on the bus, and I stood up and I asked the students, I said, what did you see as we drove through the area, as we walked over the bridge, as we went around Selma? What did you see? And I wasn't expecting an obvious answer, because that's not what we're inclined to do in that type of situation. So, the monuments, the churches, we saw some murals, and I'm like, yeah, that we did. But there was something else that was highly visible. And this is where I shift the conversation, just for clarity, to something that is very important to me in this work when I have these conversations about equity and understanding our past so that we do better going forward. What I told those kids that they were overlooking was the poverty, the economic despair. I don't know if anybody on this meeting has been to Selma recently, but no, it's not in the best of shape. There's homelessness. We passed a gentleman on the bridge who was homeless. We went through some environments close to the church that were clearly economically depressed. And I made it a point to have the youth acknowledge that there's only so much usefulness with ceremonial treatment of things, or with the ideas that are associated to celebrating something that is unfinished. So every year, this town hosts politicians and people who are celebrating progress, while the area is mired in economic depression. And that is the case for a large percentage of African Americans, or Black Americans. There's a Great Depression that is persistent in the Black American economic sense, in the community and the economic sense, that is hard to overcome, and it's hard to highlight in the way that makes total sense for us, when the narrative is countered by so much in the entertainment realm, so much in media. And that's a large part of my focus. I've merged my degrees in terms of what I'm focusing on for histories, for my history PhD, and that's, media does a disservice in displaying the true nuances of Black American life by focusing so much on the show business, the athletics. I've often said that we're Black Americans are overly represented in athletics and in entertainment, as well as incarceration and poverty. So you can't have that extreme duality and think that everybody in the middle is okay. And that's something I really desire to bring more attention to in spaces like this, because there's a reason for it. And that reasoning is attached to what I just shared about the Morrow family and the countless others who experienced racial violence and terror and were not allowed to be included in what they were entitled to post Civil War, and actually entitled to as just being human beings before that. So those are things that I wrestle with and that I find to be highly important. And I wanted to make that clear to those youth. So it was a wonderful trip in terms of that bonding and appreciating. And one of the young men who spoke at the Pettus Bridge, he wanted to make sure that it was understood how important it was to vote. And the way he articulated it was wonderful. And it was the same notion that we often hear of our ancestors dying for the right to vote, of Black Americans, Black people dying for the right to vote. And I said, yes, you're right. When I got the chance to speak with him, and when I spoke with the bus of students in mass, I said, yes, you're right. You were right. That was a great statement. I said, but we died for so much less. So keeping in mind the franchise of voting was one that welcomed peril, but so did knowing how to read, so did trying to educate yourself for the betterment of you and your family. That was equally, if not more, perilous. So I'm being open and honest with anyone I can when I say we can't just allow for these powerful moments to become symbolic posturing or political theater and then not finish the work. I'm calling that out, and I hope that it'll be received by those that matter in all of these spaces. And that's all of us, because we have to rethink how we approach this stuff and not just be so enamored with statues and monuments and holidays and things that do a disservice to those who actually sacrifice themselves for us. And I wanted to make that clear to those youth. And a couple of weeks later, I went and we did a follow-up conversation at the high school, Reedsville High. And it was wonderful. 50 or 60 students. And we had sat in a big circle. And I went around the space to make sure each one got a chance to respond. And the exercise that I'll mention firstly, and it was the primary one, I had them put at the top of index card, shared humanity and empathy. So keeping shared humanity and empathy in mind, they unpacked what they thought their roles would be had they existed in a time where slavery was still functional, where the institution was still functional. And being that they had went through the museum, being that they had encountered so much, the responses were honest, they were rangy, and they wrestled with something with them, and they shared them out throughout the space comfortably. So if youth can do it, I know we can. That's one of my takeaways. But they did it comfortably and respectfully. And some of them were honest about the potential of them being slave holders. Some of them were honest about the potential of them being enslaved people. And some of them were honest about the fact that the circumstances would dictate so much. The institution of slavery would have dictated so much. And that is a mature observation. A lot of times we think when we reflect good guy, bad guy, you know, white hat, black hat, whatever you want to call it, but an institution, something that was in the thread and fabric of this country existed, and you couldn't run from it. You couldn't run from it. So for them to be able to experience the museum, experience the memorial, and to take away from that, their presentist mind state does not limit their ability to empathize and to recognize a shared humanity with people that they will never encounter. They will never encounter. They can attach themselves to it with an understanding of that is a part of how we get to where we are today. And that is my hope, that we all can acknowledge that as we continue to have conversations like this one today and the ones that have taken place over the last couple of months, conversations that I've had with my racial equity learning community, conversations that I have in general. So I hope this has been something that was worthy of you guys' time. I'm truly appreciative and grateful to be president in this space. And Annie, I hope that was a good amount of information. And I am a person that loves questions and loves conversation. So I see the Q&A does have a couple of things in it, and I'm here for those as well. But I want to say this lastly. Reparations is not a bad word. It is a noble thing to right or wrong, and it's something that deserves our attention and conversation and understanding. But that notion of equity, in my mind, is hard to get to without recognizing where we were and what has persisted and how do we fix it. And the creativity can just go from there, right? That's the fun thing about fixing problems. There's more than one way to do it. One work I'll reference really quickly. I am a historian, so books matter. And it was written actually by a professor at Duke right down the street. Dr. Darity from Here to Equality makes a very strong argument for how reparations could be done and why they are necessary. So I'm here for any conversation or questions. And I probably left something out I wanted to include, but that's the way this thing goes. Thank you so much, y'all.
Felton, thank you so much. That was wonderful. And what an incredible opportunity that you offered to those kids. I mean, for them to be able to see that and experience that and do that with a very knowledgeable historian, I'm sure was incredibly powerful for them. And so I think that that's just amazing. I mean, you know, I think we all in this group are like, we'll go, we want to take us too. Because again, I'm sure that was just so powerful. And what an important message to instill in a group that is still so young. One question that I had, you know, we've got some questions coming in. Please, everybody, whatever you want to, you know, ask, anything like that, the Q&A box is at the bottom. Felton, we talked about this a little bit before we actually started, but I was wondering if you want to talk a little bit about the difference between equity and equality. Word choice really matters, especially in this day and age, and especially when talking about the past. And so I was hoping you could kind of just talk to us a little bit about the differences between those two words, specifically when we're talking about race.
Oh, thank you so much. And yes, we touched on this, and I like to make it clear it's not to be Webster's defined, but when we're talking about equality, it can be thought of as an inherent thing, right? Like I'm a person, you're a person. Our values may not be the same, but we recognize that there's an equality in our existence, in our shared humanity, which is one of my favorite things to bring up. This understanding that human beings have to acknowledge that there's something equal there. But equity it's the fairness, and it is the recognition of the lack of it as well. So when you speak about equity, you're talking about being fair, starting from the same place. We understand as a people, as a people that have the ability to look backwards and in the most meaningful of ways, to look at our history, recent, distant, that fairness has not existed. That fairness still struggles to exist. So when you're talking about equity and you bring up fairness, you have to first recognize the lack of its existence for such a long time, and you can place that word in the present form that we do, with the terms of we're actually addressing it. We have the energy to actually bring up the fact that equity has been lacking, but this is something we're going to address and we're going to focus on. So equality, you can think more inherent, but equity recognizes the fact that it's not been established as a norm. It's not been a fair practice. So that's my definition.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Thank you. Because again, sometimes these words are not interchangeable, and so it's helpful to know, kind of what means what, and why use one word over the other. We have a question in here. It says, I got the feeling that Alabama as a state does not want to recognize their history of enslaving people. What are your thoughts?
Believe it or not, Alabama does a really good job in certain places that I've been. I lived in Birmingham for a brief period of time. I thought that their civil rights center and museum was it still is at the top of my list, and it is in a park with statues and monuments that also recognize the civil rights movement, that also recognize Alabama's past in association with the labor that was there. Maybe not high level recognition in there of slavery, but very much recognition of segregation, of labor exploitation in the mines, and Alabama is known for its resources in terms of what was in the ground, so the digging and the mining and things of that nature. I was very impressed with Montgomery and the museums that I just spoke about in the memorial. Very impressive. That was the first time I had toured those places. And the only place I was really disappointed, to be honest, was we visited Rosa Parks Museum. And at that museum, I was very disappointed in the fact that they seemed to adhere very stringently to the mythology around Rosa Parks, just being tired and not wanting, but they lacked I think the elevation of the planning that took place, the fact that she was not the first woman to do this, the sit-in on the bus, or to refuse to give up a seat on the bus, the fact that she was very much active in the NAACP to the point that she went to investigate the rape of Reese Taylor, which is another story that is sad and puts on a high visibility the lack of protection for Black Americans during that period of time. And I'll make note really quickly, just as Lucinda Morrow went and pointed to the killers of her husband, Reese Taylor went and told of who had raped her, and no justice was served. But I want to make sure I disrupt that idea that Black folks always took it on the chin. That's not the case. They definitely they forced the system to acknowledge its hypocrisy at every turn. So I'll leave that there. But I've been very impressed with Alabama. I want to make that clear in most instances. But yeah.
I will add too, I've in my personal experience, I found that sometimes some states are better about recognizing their history of enslaving people than recognizing their role in the civil rights movement. And I do wonder if some of that is because some of the people who were involved in some of the horrific backlash are still living. And so, at least, you know, and again, some states are better than others in that, but I have found that while some states do really well at addressing, again, the past with enslaving people, they don't do well with addressing.
I think there's a both and to that equation, and I totally agree. But Alabama's there's a lot of old money there. There's a lot of old money in North Carolina, and a lot of times when you track the old money, it's going to be attached to the institution of slavery. And then when you get to looking at the politics side of it, and the who was tasked with policing or keeping the peace, as you stated, then you get to see that there's a whole nother group of people that have persisted. I will mention a podcast that I really appreciate. It is called Buried Truths. And they do a lot with cold case murders from the civil rights era that made, I think, Atlanta and Mississippi. I'm pretty sure they probably did something in Alabama as well. But they even did a present episode on Ahmaud Arbery, who was murdered in Georgia. And it's a great podcast, and is comes from Emory in Georgia, in Atlanta, the college there. And I'm blanking on I think Hank Klebanoff is the former reporter who does that podcast. But I bring that up because the history is long and very sordid. So we can't just ascribe, slavery or civil rights. It is all connected.
Yeah.
And there is some points that it's just worthy of exposing yourself to, whether it's this or that. So, but yeah, no, I don't think anybody does the most wonderful job, but I think that there is some recognition that I can appreciate now.
I will, the podcast Buried Truths, I will send that out when this is being recorded. And so I will send a link to the video that Felton showed us at the beginning. I'll send that out so people can watch it on their own or share it with other people. And then I will also send out the name of the podcast for everybody too. The next question is, I just moved here from Alexandria, Virginia, where in recent years they have added historic markers and signage at the sites of the 2 lynchings that took place there. Is there anything like that here in Hillsborough or Orange County?
Absolutely. And I'm sure that some members on this call could probably speak to it more definitively, but I'm aware of the Soil Project, which I thought was pretty awesome to go and acknowledge these areas that they knew were where lynchings took place, and to gather soil from them and put it in jars. There are some links that I can actually share with Ann as well that'll give you ideas about things that you can embrace here. And something that I've been able to become more aware of and actually go and participate in. One was what they're calling the Civil Rights Trail. So there's markers that are being dedicated across the state to activities related to civil rights. There was one down in Monroe dedicated to Robert F. Williams. You should definitely look him up, the North Carolinian who did some wonderful work in regards to civil rights, and actually was considered radical. I don't even use certain terms when it comes to somebody who was fighting for fairness, equality, and justice during that period of time, but it was radical because it went against what was normalized. So he was a North Carolinian who did that in the 50s and 60s. He was a Korean War vet. And in Rockingham County, the Griggs versus Duke case, in which the norms that have become established that we take for granted in terms of having a measure of safety at work in regards to you not being allowed to be fired or dismissed because of your race, gender, sex, and what have you. That becomes a standard because some Black men in Rockingham County sued Duke Power because they were limited in their ability to ascend within the company and to do other jobs because of racism. And that normalized what we take for granted, but a marker was placed in Wentworth in recognition of that case. I did get to attend that ceremony. So there are definitely things to tap into. And welcome to North Carolina. Come to Greensboro, where I live, and you can actually go through the Civil Rights Museum, the Woolworth, where the actual sit-ins, there were sit-ins before, but the sit-in movement really takes off in Greensboro, and it's worthy of your attention if you have the time and capacity. And I want to make this, Annie, I have one other clip I would love to show that I think crystallizes what I'm talking about. And it's a short one, but I can show it now, or I can
you can show it now, totally.
Okay.
Yeah. And just so
Okay.
everyone knows, I've written down on my phone, I have written down the links for stuff that Felton's talking about. But yeah, show us the clip.
Okay, I'll show this clip, and it is of one of our favorite citizens. And he's actually talking about something that you won't hear talked about very much outside of what we normally know of Dr. King. So I just want to play this clip. It's relatively short.
We can't hear the sound, Felton.
Hey, what is going on with that?
Sometimes you have to enable the sound share.
Oh, is it still? What about now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Right. What about now?
Yeah, we can hear it.
Give the Negro any land. Through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest. Meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents, further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farm. Not only that, today, many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they're the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. This is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
So, as you probably can see, and as many of you may not have been aware of, Dr. King was not all kumbaya. And that was a reality that he was embracing not long before he was assassinated. But he wasn't the first. He won't be the last. But there's a recognition of how egregious the treatment of Black Americans was, and how it was supported by certain systems that uplifted others simply because they were not Black Americans. One of the things that I really embrace in terms of understanding that gives you a quick, and the time we have left, glimpse into how practical things could have been. Du Bois wrote a book called Black Reconstruction, and in it he speaks about the slow turn back to slavery post the failure of Reconstruction. And he's recognizing the skilled labor that existed during slavery and post-slavery that was shunned, discarded, and turned away. The skilled labor that was dismissed in favor of welcoming new people, Europeans, and supporting them learning things that this group of newly freed people already knew. So those are things that I like to make sure I highlight as a historian. Contextualization is one of my primary goals. And as a historian who is not traditional, who does desire to get these conversations and this information to the masses and to the community at large, that's important. We have to complicate this thing before we make sense of it. And we can't just, put on the good hat or the bad hat. We have to make sure we understand how complex it is, but also the missed opportunities. Missed opportunity means you recognize it and you could potentially create a new opportunity.
Do you have any, on that note, do you have any other books that you recommend? Du Bois's book is excellent, by the way. I've read it. It's very good.
Yeah, it's a tone.
It is. It's a doorstop. Yeah.
It is. So there are a lot of books I could probably recommend. One of my most recent favorites in terms of it's a more contemporary time frame, but it does a really good job of, again, you expand on understanding of how much Black Americans have been up against for so long, and it makes great arguments for not just acknowledging it but doing something about it. But Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor's Race for Profit is another amazing work that I hold up in very high regard. The Betrayal of the Negro by Rayford W. Logan, who was a World War I veteran, a Black soldier. And and it's a bit complex, but it is a good book because he's talking about the failure to protect Black Americans post Civil War, post Reconstruction. And he's actually bringing into the conversation the negotiation and the way that this protection disbanded, the way the Union troops were removed from the South. That was a part of, the negotiation for Rutherford B. Hayes to take office, was the removal of the troops from the South who were protecting Black Americans. And then you get this ramp up of lynching, and 1919 is one of the, it's called the Red Summer because it was one of the most violent years for Black Americans that they had to endure. There's so many books I can recommend, but I don't know. I'm kind of blanking on some right now. But
if you think of them later, you can also email me.
Yeah, I can always send, and I'm sure I could send you a bunch. I absolutely could.
I will gladly take them and I will forward it out to everybody.
The Fire of Freedom. I really like that book, and it is about another North Carolinian who Abraham Galloway. It's written by David Selznick, I believe. Very good book, and it's almost like reading something about a James Bond character, how daring this guy was during his time of enslavement. He was spying on people. He back and forth. He'd done a lot of good things in New Bern. He actually visited the White House with some of his constituents and met with Lincoln, if I'm remembering that correctly. But it's a very good work. There's so many, and I know we're up against time, but again, I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and I hope you guys have it as well.
Thank you. I've got two more questions if you've got time. One is a question about, do you recommend the book The Half Has Never Been Told by Edward Baptist?
Yeah, that's a really good book in terms of understanding how critical slavery was to the economics of America. That's something that's often overlooked, but yeah, that's definitely one I recommend, and it exposes again the hypocrisy of some dismissal of how critical the free labor was to building this country and building the wealth that still exists to this day.
I was trying to see if I've got it, and here it is. I was trying to see if I could show you guys back in my thousands of books, but this is what it looks like. It's another thick one. But it is clearly, you can see on my tabs. It's very good. And then our last question that we will end with is from retired Judge Beverly Scarlett. She's texted me her question. My question is whether anyone has done research on the Black men who were made to serve as witnesses to lynchings and report back to the Black community.
Interesting. I'm not aware of that, Judge Scarlett, and it's good to get a question from you. I'm not aware of that, but I'm sure if there's anything that exists in any documents associated with it, it's worth exploring, I'm sure. Now, something I will say about lynching, there's another book that I'll recommend, and it's not one that is an easy encounter. It's Lynching: An American Spectacle. I can't remember but there's a lot of images of lynchings that took place. But I know that's a primary form of documenting those events, Judge Scarlett, I'm sorry. But as far as being forced to witness, in some cases, everybody had to endure that. One of the things that I think I mentioned earlier, I may not have, was Mr. Ben Johnson, who's was recorded on the WPA file, the Hillsborough resident who spoke about the brutal lynching of Cyrus. Guy, he basically said that, you know, his body hung for 4 days over a street, and because the people who lynched Cyrus said if anybody touched him, they'd be hung too. So 4 days that body hung, Cyrus's body hung over the street, and it was only taken down after the sheriff sent some folks to do it. So the terror was real, and it was intentional, and it was meant to be seen and felt by everyone. I will say, Judge Scarlett, that Ida B. Wells did a magnificent job capturing so much about lynching, and her works may be something to explore to see if you may find some of what you're looking for in terms of witness accounts. But Ida Wells did a magnificent job during the time where people were trying to ignore the atrocity. So yeah.
Felton, this has been absolutely delightful. Thank you so much for this conversation. I think we could probably go on for the rest of the afternoon, but I know people have to get back to work or hopefully get back to whatever you're doing this afternoon. Thank you so much. This was just so informative and wonderful. Everyone, I've got the notes down on the book titles and some of that stuff and podcasts that Felton mentioned. Felton, if you think of anything else, please send it my way.
Just so it's a one-shot deal, and I'll send you those links.
Perfect.
I'll send you those links right now. You can make it a one-shot deal. So don't worry about the chat, guys. I'll send them to Annie, and she'll send them out. And this has been wonderful. Again, I truly appreciate you all. I'm grateful to be here, and I'm thankful to have people that are curious and want to know more. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for spending your lunchtime with us. Felton, thank you for giving us your lunchtime. Have a wonderful afternoon, and I will get this recording out to you all at the beginning of next week. So thank you all again. See ya.